to order, and I will now read the virtual guidelines if you want to project those. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. And if you want to put pronouns in there, I don't think any of us would object, unless if you do, speak up. Participants can mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. You can find this by clicking on either the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom or the reactions button in the toolbar. I will then call upon participants. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Mr. Jonathan Church via the chat box at jchrch@ctps.org or at 857-702-3709. I'm now going to read the accessibility statement. This meeting is being recorded. It is accessible to persons with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional assistance in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact the inestimable Jonathan Church via the chat box or via email at jchurch.org or by calling 857-702-3709. Thank you. We'll now move on. And my name is Brian Kane. I'm the Executive Director of the MBTA Advisory Board, and I want to welcome everyone to this meeting. And Jonathan, do you mind calling the roll?
Certainly. MAPC,
Good morning, Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Mass DOT,
Yep, Derek Cravat here from MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning.
City of Framingham.
Dennis Giambetti, City of Framingham, Metro West.
Thank you. Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Leonard Diggins, and in my estimation, Jonathan Church is inevitable. Just saying.
Thank you, Len. That calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I thought I said inestimable, but he's also inevitable. But hey, he's a treasure no matter what. Okay, we will now move on to public comment. If there is any member of the public or anyone at all who would like to make a comment to the committee, you may use the raise hand function as I explained earlier, and we would be honored to hear your comments. Not seeing anyone. If there are individual items that folks would like to comment on during the meeting, please use the raise hand function and we will do our best to get to you. Any members of the public that would like to provide written comments, you can do so to Mr. Jonathan Church, who is inevitable and inestimable, at jchurch@ctps.org if you are able. Okay, we'll move on to item 3, which is a summary of the September 22nd meeting. Is there a motion and a second with respect to this recording?
I'll make a motion to approve the summary.
Summary, that's right, Eric. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second,
Thank you, Derek. Mr. Church?
Brian Kane,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Yes.
Derek Cravat,
yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Yes.
and Leonard Diggins.
Yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. We'll move on to item 4, which is an action item. For the operations plan, it is a discussion of board member roles for non-officers. Logan, I think we have some text, if I'm not
Yep,
mistaken.
I'm just about getting there to do that.
Thanks, Jonathan. I will take this opportunity to rename myself as I asked everyone else to do.
Brian, as the chair, I wanted to suggest I don't think you all necessarily need to vote formally to approve each section if we have general consensus. So we had it on the agenda as an action item, but if you choose to do so moving forward, I think if there's general consensus as we finish up these sections, that's probably part of the process that we don't necessarily need to do for each section, but I will leave it to you if you'd still like to do that or change that process going forward.
If only that were in the operations plan, Tegan.
I know, right?
No, we've operated through consensus before, but if folks feel strongly, we can take those. So, okay, it's on the screen. Where are we here now?
So I just wanted to show that the highlighted areas are the ones that we haven't addressed in the questions. Further down in the document, the other highlighted portions are items that we included as edits based on the meeting that we had on October 6th.
Okay. All right, so let's go up to the first highlighted section and just have a quick discussion on that. Committee roles are separate. Should any of the work or discussion currently carried out by board members be shifted into committees, or should any work committees currently do shift to board members? Tegan, I know you just came back from AMPO and a lot of this was topics there. Do you mind filling us in on what you might have learned?
So I think the highlights here just indicate that this particular document won't cover some of those questions we posed. I actually have them posed as some of the conversation questions for the committee document, which we'll get to next.
Great.
So I think we could skip, we could skip that one for now.
Okay.
And then I think the second highlight, it's just worth calling out that we didn't define any sort of further roles in this document or edits around ex officio or non-voting member role. And if this group feels comfortable with that, that is fine. We can move forward. If this group does want to discuss that more, that would require a bit more discussion. But at this point, we don't have definitions for that.
Did you get a sense of what ex officio members might do elsewhere in your travels last week?
No, I think they typically serve in the capacity in the conversations I've had that we have ours, our non-voting members serving, for example. So I guess the question is, are we talking about non-voting members? Are we talking about sort of permanent seats? But in terms of non-voting members, the way that, for example, FHWA participates is how that's often the case, where it's sort of advisory. It's, an ability to share information, answer questions. So there's not a lot of formalization of that type of role that I'm aware of.
Okay. Derek, what about in your travels around the Commonwealth?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever seen that role articulated in an MOU or anything. Like I think that I see ex officio members listed, but I don't know if there's any narrative description of their role explicitly. I can take a look back at some of the MOUs from other regions and see if there is a section on that. And I can let you know what I find, but nothing's coming to mind immediately, but I'll take a look. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we just want to make sure we're at engaging in best practice, industry best practice. I don't know, Len or Eric or Dennis, you guys have been doing this a long time. You have any thoughts on what ex officio members should do, if we should clarify it or sort of leave it as it is?
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand,
It's okay, Len.
Okay.
Forgive me this time.
Sure, thank you. Well, I would say make an attempt to clarify, but I'm not sure how I would, and given the experience of others, I guess we can leave that for later. And if, as we go through the process, something occurs to us, we can then come back to it.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where there's not really a better alternative right now that anybody can kind of think of or has seen. So we can not, it ain't broken, don't fix it kind of applies. But as you said, Len, if anything comes up, we can always come back to it. All right, I guess we'll move on to our next highlighted section.
Dennis
Sorry,
has
Eric.
Dennis has his hand
Oh,
raised.
I'm sorry, Dennis, I couldn't see you there. Go ahead, please. Does anyone know how to unmute on the phone?
*6, *9.
Are you on the phone, Dennis? Otherwise, you're muted. Okay,
Sorry, can you hear
there
me
he
now?
is.
Sorry.
No worries.
I guess I'm on a phone. So I just took my hand down because you made the comment I was going to make, is that if it's not broken, don't fix it. I think our ex officio members that we have play an important role, and I think they play their role appropriately. You know, they
Mhm.
kind of represent the organization, and they speak up when they need to be. But I don't think that there's a problem there. So
Agreed. And I think we're all in consensus that this is something that doesn't need our immediate attention. And if there's something we learn, we can come back to it. So why don't we move on to our next highlighted section, please? Board members are expected to participate in sub-regional meetings relevant for the entity that they represent, to be able to share information about operations of the MPO, promote opportunities to engage with the MPO, such as events or elections, as well as hear and understand transportation and related land use and resiliency issues in their sub-region. This one seems pretty straightforward. It's basically, if you're going to be a member of the body, you should be an active member of the body. This seems pretty innocuous to me. I guess we can always debate what it means to promote opportunities. You can always probably promote more opportunities. But I think as long as folks are active and generally with a good faith effort doing their best to promote their subregion and be involved, that's the best we can ask for. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I know that in the past we've had, some folks who were representing the subregion that barely ever attended subregional meetings, and I think that's improved over time. But I think being clear that that is the expectation is good.
Sounds good. Is there can you just talk a little bit about the subregional meetings, Eric, and how they kind of work at MAPC? And
Yeah, I mean, we have a staff person who coordinates each of the sub-regional meetings, sub-regional coordinator. They meet about monthly. The group, identifies kind of the topic areas that they want to focus on. They usually create a work plan. And in addition to like a few key things that they're kind of working on from meeting to meeting, they're also getting just updates on things that are happening across the region, everything, getting updated on the MPO process. The staff we talk about the UPW, the development of the UPWP, the TIP, the long range plan. But I think what's really helpful is if the MPO representative for that subregion can be available and can not only be engaged in that discussion and kind of lead the discussion around what are the subregional priorities is really important, and then that person can be engaged at the MPO table on what they heard from their subregion.
so it sounds like you guys facilitate a pretty robust process for this. So
yeah, and I think I think the word participate doesn't have to mean has to attend every single meeting. Attendance will be taken. I just think the intent here is that they're engaged in that process and attending the most relevant meetings.
makes sense. Go ahead, Len.
Yep. So I'm curious as to whether attendance has been greater since you've been doing these meetings. I'm presuming you're still doing them remotely. And I ask because it's a little bit of a control with respect to the broader MPO meetings, because we see a better attendance, but we're assuming that's because people have to travel shorter distances. I would imagine that sub-regional meetings had less travel involved, or at least they were closer. So are you noticing that attendance is better or different since remote?
Yeah, no, without a doubt, attendance is better. I mean, there were some subregions that had traditionally better attendance than others, but anytime I think you have to, travel, physically to a meeting versus just being able to kind of jump on at your desk is it's just easier. So yeah, we've seen attendance improve with the virtual format. Now, I think, personally, I think the robustness of discussion is not as great as an in-person event. And so the subregions are looking to do, continue virtual format, but then try to do a handful of in-person, a couple in-person events. So we actually did a really great one on the South Shore in September and in Hull, and it was really amazing to see everybody in person. And we had a really wonderful discussion about South Shore transportation needs, and we got an overview of a shuttle bus pilot that they're doing down there. So it was just a really great to see things in person.
Yeah, again, it sounds like ample opportunity is provided by MAPC, and I'm sure MAPC is working on boosting its attendance at those and participation at those. And, we don't have to, I don't believe, reference that in this operations plan, but it's great to know that it's going on and something we all encourage. Oh, Derek, I saw your hand. Go ahead, please.
Yep, I think Dennis had his hand up as well. I don't know if he was first.
I was just about to say that, yes.
Okay.
Sorry, Dennis.
So-
I thought your hand was up from earlier. I apologize. Go ahead if you want to.
I think it's down now, so
Oh,
maybe
it's
it was
down
up
now.
from earlier. Yep.
All right, Derek,
All right.
you have the floor.
All right. Yep. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question and sort of half question, half comment that I was kind of just kicking around with all of the kind of questions and issues raised this past year about understanding of the TIP process and how to submit projects that might be considered for the TIP. I feel like I've been hearing a lot recently about, maybe staff turnover in communities and things like that. I just didn't know if, to what extent the TIP process and how to get a project onto the TIP was discussed at these sub-regional meetings, and sort of how that works, and if this could be a forum for kind of engaging new members in that.
It absolutely could. And I think we've had a ton of turnover at the local level. And I do think that doing, sort of like the, TIP development 101 and sort of the mass, the whole mass development, highway project, design development process could be a huge benefit to doing that at the subregions. Yeah, totally.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, and I know we have presentations in the highway division too, like they have some training materials. Maybe it's worth having some kind of agenda item for folks to give some of that information. But yeah, happy to coordinate that piece offline, but I don't know if it impacts the MOU, like if there's like a sentence about just like events and elections, and maybe this I think broadly covers the TIP process, but if that's of interest to add in us like a little a bit about that, then
Okay.
maybe valuable, but just
Well, we could make
throwing it out there.
reference to that if you want, or we could also make reference to MAPC's sub-regional activities if there's a document on that. Brad Rawson from the city of Somerville.
Good morning, Brian. Thanks, team. Just in quick response to Derek's point and Eric's confirmation at a recent intercore committee focused meeting, the relationship between TIP project development, LRTP re-up was discussed explicitly. So I definitely agree, Derek. This is a terrific way to get members, whether they're veterans or new representatives, more and more sense of ownership and empowerment in this process. I would caution this group and make sure that we treat state-sponsored projects the same way, and that we continue to work hard to pull back the curtain on Mass Highway and MBTA developed capital projects, since they obviously just have a fundamental impact on TIP and on LRTP. And I think if we really want to generate that authentic buy-in from new or veteran members, we're going to need to treat all project proponents the same way. So thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, Brad, as always. Okay, I think we're good on this. I think most of us agree that it's fine, and that MAPC is doing a good job of organizing the subregions. To Brad's point, yes, we need to find a way to treat all those projects the same. Not sure that this is the place to do it in this document, but Brad, you're absolutely right. And I think everyone here agrees with you. Can we go down to the next one, just in the
Yep.
interest of time?
Yep, and I'm happy to just cover it, just to.
Yeah, thank you.
Let you know that we added item H here about participating and creating more opportunities for public engagement and education, particularly on transportation issues, which includes board members attending staff-led events, recommending staff ways to engage local municipalities and reaching out to engage in stakeholders. I think it's pretty straightforward. And it just added a clarification to the question that we had up above.
Okay. Seems pretty straightforward. Again, it's asking for participation, spelling out what the expectation is, safe in the knowledge that none of us are perfect and can do all of these things all of the time. But I think this is at least a good, like I said, set of expectations. So.
Okay, that covers all of the items for this. So if there's consensus, we can go with this and start putting this into the draft for the actual operations plan.
Yes, please. Let's do that.
Okay,
Okay, and we can move on to our next agenda item. And Tegan, I believe you're going to take the helm for this one.
Yeah, I thought I'd walk through and just sort of summarize some of the information we put up front here and why, and then just touch on kind of the most important, I think, conversation questions for you all, where you have some ability to have, I think, some good discussion about what committees should look like moving forward. So when you look at the document and the information we shared with you, so in the memo that we developed to guide what we were going to do for the operations plan, we said that we would identify the purpose and responsibilities of the committee meetings, talk about their attendees, talk about maybe what the structure, what the officers may look like for those committees, and define when and why one might establish an ad hoc committee. So all of those things were things in the memo that we thought we might want to discuss here. When we looked back at the MOU, you can see that there's very little about committees in general. What the MOU does talk about is very specifically about the advisory council, the Regional Transportation Advisory Council, and the role of that advisory council. So I think it would make sense for us, the staff, to work a little bit further with Len as the current chair. I know, Len, you're working with staff on updating bylaws for the advisory council, but to make sure that we feel that if we need to further clarify the role of the advisory council and how it interacts with the board, we can do that in this document. When you look at just the general establishment of committees and task force, you see it's very vague in the MOU. It just says the MPO shall appoint committees as the terms necessary. So very open in terms of the MOU on the committees. And again, the certification review, we always just sort of note that it said that it was important to talk about subcommittees and officer roles for subcommittees. That's what the feds asked us to do in the certification review. So that's the sort of the backdrop for this. We pulled in some information that comes from some resources looking at multiple MPOs and how they're structures. So there's a USDOT report, there's an innovative MPO report. And so we just pulled a couple of things when they talk about committees, what they primarily talked about. And one of the major topics in this area is that many MPOs are structured a bit differently than ours, where there is a policy board that is kind of the final decision maker, but that there are these larger technical committees, technical advisory committees that typically are made up of the type of staff that we actually have on our policy board. Some of them more of the staff of cities and towns and those representatives, and that they discuss in much greater depth what's going on related to TIP projects and other things, and then make recommendations to the policy board. So we have a very different structure currently. And I just think, though, that it is worth considering sort of how those conversations, the technical conversations, happen, if they're happening to your satisfaction in the policy board meetings, or if there's some other way that we want to bolster or more support those more technical oriented conversations. So if you scroll down a little bit more, there's some statistics there that like 92% of MPOs in one of these surveys have PAC. So again, the vast majority operate a bit differently than we do. And that's not to say it's right for us. I just think it's important to note from a peer perspective. If you scroll down to the next table, we did provide just a table from one of these reports just to show the types of committees that you see pop up at different MPOs. Again, of course, the technical advisory format is kind of at the top. The citizens advisory, I think, is more like the RTAC, other MPOs versions of RTAC. And it's interesting to note that, not as many as I would think actually even have that. I think that's really important. And actually a lot of MPOs don't have that role. Now there's a lot of other committees here. The only ones that sort of overlap with what we have, I think, is the Congestion Management Committee. And then of course we have a UPWP committee and the Administration of Finance Committee. So these are all sorts of other committees that you could consider if you think they are useful. I don't have any recommendation that I think that, that we need something like a Bike and Ped committee or et cetera. But if you think that that is necessary, you can always discuss that. If you scroll down, there's another reference from a report about the different kind of structure of policy boards typically being more oriented towards elected officials, which is why we have such, I think, a different structures, because that's not what our policy board looks like. And then finally, the questions for discussion that I thought it would be great to just open up today. I think the top two are the most kind of like open-ended for discussion. So the ones after that have more to do with basic process of establishing committees, establishing the officers of committees, and those are things we should discuss. But I think the most open-ended are, first of all, are the existing committees that this MPO has enough to complete the work the way you want to complete the work in the region? And do they best support the policy board in the way that you want them to support the policy board? And then the second question is, if you think about all of the information we typically present and discuss at the policy board, should any of that work or discussion be shifted into committees or vice versa? So I think that is where none of that is set in stone in the MOU or otherwise. And so I think there's a lot of room for you all to decide if what's working now is working well, or if there are some adjustments that could be useful. So I will pause there and happily answer questions you have, Brian, but that's my setup for your conversation.
No, that's great. Thank you. I guess, so I guess I have two responses. One is I think we should create in the operations plan standing committees and sort of other committees. Standing committees, I think we need to have on an ongoing basis, like this one for more administrative tasks. And then other committees we can kind of create on an annual basis. I think we should put in some best practices around having elections to committees sort of at the annual general meeting. And we should discuss who chairs those, if it's if it's a regional body or a municipality or both, but that's fine. I guess with respect to a technical committee, I think it's a good idea to discuss it. I know we kind of do that right now at the board level. And I guess the question for you, Tegan, is do you see something like a technical committee or any of these other committees, Bike and Ped or any of them, as sort of receiving reports or information from staff kind of first, going through a first vetting, so to speak, and then making recommendations to the full body? Or do you see kind of the process continuing where the staff recommendations, the staff reports would still go to the full body as a whole? And I guess I asked the question in the sense that time is limited, and I don't think we necessarily need to have duplicative reports at both levels, unless folks feel that that's really important.
Yeah, so just from a staff perspective, I'll share my thoughts, and I'd welcome other staff to share theirs. And then I'm happy. I'd love to hear your opinions. I think it's interesting to look at like the UPWP committee as an example, where there's a lot more depth of conversation around particular aspects of the UPWP, and in particular the discrete studies that are identified, that I know that I see board members engage in and seem to be very interested in and seem to really enjoy kind of digging in a little bit more. Then there are other processes like the TIP process, where all of the conversations happen at the board meeting. And I think that I sat obviously, as with more of you, some of you, through the ad hoc TIP committee, and there was a lot more in-depth conversation in the ad hoc committee about what to do when certain challenges arise, what challenges are in the TIP process. And so you could imagine with other processes like the TIP process, that some more in-depth conversations could be useful to sort of bring certain recommendations or certain opinions or certain things to the board. I don't think that we don't want to have, I think, a TIP committee that's making all the recommendations to the board, or a TAC committee that's making all the recommendations to the board, because we already sort of have the same people on the policy board as we would have in a committee. And I think we want the committees to be smaller than the policy board as a whole. So they would have a more sort of like narrower, deeper focus on some certain aspects, if we're following kind of the ongoing structure that we have now for our board and our committees. So I guess the question would be, is there an area of work that you think deserves that deeper ongoing conversation? I think as staff, we would appreciate deeper engagement with the board throughout, for example, the TIP process, the TIP development process. And we are increasing our capacity on staff to sort of have those conversations with board members and also with stakeholders and project proponents throughout the process. And I guess I would welcome the board to think about how that process in particular is evolving, and if there's ways you want to enhance the information sharing and the conversation about challenges around the TIP.
Okay, so I'll just make, these are my last two comments, and then we'll open it up. I guess on the subject of the full board receiving every report and study that staff completes, I think though there's great opportunity there to push some of that to the committee level. I don't think that the full board needs to spend the time hearing 20-minute findings for every single piece of work that CTPS has ever done, which is kind of the situation now. And I see eyes glazing over as I look across my screen sometimes when certain reports are given. That sort of thing for certain items seems like it would be better given to a committee of expert folks or folks really interested in certain topics who could then report out to the full board. We received the report from staff on X. It basically said Y, and kind of give the board a little more time to focus on decision making. That's my personal opinion. With respect to the TIP, I agree. I think we have a little bit of an Aaron Burr from Hamilton issue where everybody wants to be in the room where it happens. So I'm not sure how to go about putting that through a committee process, but let me open it up to everybody else here and see what folks have to say. Go ahead, Eric.
Sorry. Yeah, so I would be very interested in other people's opinions, particularly about creating like a TIP committee, because I think there could be a lot of value in having a smaller group that's vetting projects, that's discussing things with staff, that's hearing, I think, more detail from folks at the highway division about projects and in the districts. And ideally, it could be a way of getting information earlier and maybe addressing the challenges we have sometimes where, we find out kind of too late about project readiness and cost increases, and then we're making kind of rush decisions at the full board. But as Brian just said, my sense is that the TIP development is probably the thing that MPO members feel like they most want to be involved in. And so I'd be very interested to hear from people, if the feeling was everyone wants to be a part of that, then, it doesn't make any sense. And so, that I think it would be really interesting to hear, people's thoughts about it. I could see, something where the committee is flushing things out, and it's not like the committee is making one decision or recommendation that's then sort of going to the policy board for sort of a rubber stamp. I think it would have to be clear that there will still be a robustness of discussion at the full policy board, but I think for it to be an effective committee, it has to be a committee. It has to be small. And I know MAPC, I would want to be on that committee, and so if everybody wants to be on it, then I think that's the challenge. So I'd be very interested in what other people think. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Let's go, Dennis, then Len.
Yeah, thanks. This is something that has, puzzled me and bothered me, I guess, for a number of years of how we do the tip process. And as Eric kind of alluded to, that I think everybody is so focused and wants to be involved with the tip. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing that we do every year, right? And everybody has kind of if not a self-interest, they have a certain interest in projects, right? And sometimes I feel that we get it at the very end and we're detached from how we got there, right? But at the same token, if we have a committee that does it, I'm concerned that we have undue influence of those committee members of what pet projects they may have, right? And I don't have any answer to it. I just know what the issues are. And I'm not quite sure I don't have to think more about it. I've given it some thought. I just haven't come up with a real good solution other than I know what the issues are and the pitfalls potential are.
Here. Go ahead, Len.
Well, I mean, it isn't so much that I think the committee would have to be small as much as it would have to just be dedicated to a given topic. Assuming that anyone could join the committee, and I think that would be necessary. I mean, it would allow people to have a venue where they could ask as many questions as they want, or at least more questions than they would at a full board meeting. And I think that might give people who are a little bit concerned about the nature of the questions or the length of the meeting another option being for asking and getting more information. And maybe a way to go about doing this is just like say, we're going to have an extra meeting a month. I mean, and it could be a committee that has a structure with a chair, and the agenda just kind of changes based on the interest or things that we have to accomplish. I mean, as a board. So that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Len. Jen Rowe and then Derek.
Thank you. A couple thoughts. One, if as kind of Len was discussing, if there were like a second meeting or another opportunity to talk about tip projects, I wonder if some thought could be put into changing the format and maybe not using Robert's rules to kind of create a different dynamic where it's more kind of exploratory and more encouraging of people to kind of ask those questions and discuss. And I find Robert's rules tends to restrict that kind of free-flowing conversation. That's one thing. The second, I wonder if one way to kind of make this committee not something that everyone will automatically join is to make it a little bit more focused on the tip process and kind of take, not have in-depth back and forths, or like really try to take the negotiations around the specific projects as much as possible and keep that at the MPO level, but have a place for folks to kind of reflect on how the tip process has been going, what seems maybe a little bit off, how we might want to do things later, and then therefore just kind of attract the folks who really want to spend time getting into that nitty-gritty process level kind of questions. Thanks.
As you can tell, we love Robert's rules here at the ANF committee. Go ahead, Derek.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree with Dennis, Jen, and Len and Eric that I think there's clearly a need for this. I think sometimes these kinds of process changes or improvements are most effective if they're couched in existing processes. And so I think two that come to mind are tip project scoring. I know that every year the tip project manager at CTPS undergoes a process to evaluate and score projects and then develop scenarios. So I know in other regions like Pioneer Valley comes to mind, they have kind of an open forum where communities actually come and see other communities' projects getting evaluated by staff and can have a discussion around that. So I don't know, there could be some potential. It's not really a formal meeting. It's like kind of framed as just project scoring meetings. The other thing that comes to mind is tip readiness days. So every year in February, we at MassDOT, in coordination with all of the regional planning agencies, hold a meeting called Tip Readiness Days, and we talk about every single project that's in the STIP and propose projects for the out year of the new year of the next TIP. So this coming year, it would be 2028 for 24 to 28 TIP development. And we evaluate project's readiness and potential to be programmed in those years. That meeting happens, it's like a 3-day long, it's, you know, our whole week that week in our office. And we do that in February. And, you know, I think there could be some good potential to maybe take that same framework and apply that a little bit earlier in the year, maybe an off year. So it's not during the heavy kind of season of TIP development, maybe do that in like, you know, June or July, or even in the fall, September or something like that. And then that way, when we get to TIP readiness days, we're kind of more in the height of TIP season, we'll already have had a discussion about potential projects that could go in that last year of the TIP and get a status update from MassDOT folks and others in the municipalities that have TIP projects and others that want TIP projects or that are interested in the process to come and have a discussion about their project's readiness. So just throw that out there as one potential idea that I think could be useful.
Eric Baressa.
You know, Derek, thanks for bringing that up, because when I was preparing for the meeting and just reading through these, you know, questions, I was remembering that many years ago, like over 10 years ago, when I first joined the MPO, we did a TIP day. There was a day-long meeting we would have. Yeah, it was a long day. It was like an 8-hour day, and we would have every municipality who was interested in seeing a project considered by the MPO come and present. It was mostly consultants. It was their consultants who were giving the presentations. And it was so overwhelming that like we would slot people in for 15 minutes presentations. It was just like boom, boom, we'd hear about projects. And many of the projects were not at a level of readiness really to be considered. And I think we were stricter back then about programming projects. And then we kind of, as we all know, we kind of got you know, easier on that. So, but the point is, I could see value in going back to something like that, as long as it wasn't so overwhelming and it was better managed. It was kind of like people would come in and it was like next, and there was not really good opportunity for conversation discussion. That was one reason why, you know, the body felt like we didn't need to do that. It was not adding a lot of value, but I could see a committee that is focused more on the projects and hearing more about the projects, hearing from proponents about the projects. That is one thing that we don't do a lot at the policy board, is we hear from staff, oh, there's a complete streets project in the city of Lynn, and you know, it costs this much money, but we don't, and it's scored, you know, X. And we don't really spend a lot of time we don't ever really get a presentation from the municipality on the details of the project. And that could be nice to carve out time to go into more depth. At MAPC, you know, we look at all the projects and we often follow up with the proponents to try to learn more about what it is that they're doing, particularly with a focus on bike, pedestrian, bus improvements for corridors with bus corridor. Are they thinking about incorporating, you know, dedicated bus lanes or other bus priority into it? So anyways, I could see that being a valuable thing. But my question, Derek, is for you. You said you were saying do it during not the TIP development year. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So the way we do it now is in February, we evaluate existing projects that are programmed, and then we look at so it's all part of the next TIP development, and it inevitably involves discussion of current year projects. But yeah, we're focused on the status of projects programmed in the TIP for the purposes of building the next year's TIP. So this year we'll be building the 24 to 28 STIP and TIPs, and thinking about what projects that are programmed in the current TIP past the current year, what their readiness status is, so we can get a sense of when the TIP managers go to build next year's TIP, they have a sense from MassDOT right of way and environmental and other folks that are involved in readiness and advertising, they have a sense of what year the projects will actually advertise in. But I think it could be helpful to almost do it maybe even just for current year projects earlier in the fiscal year. So we don't have a situation like, where Bedford at the, I guess that's a kind of extenuating circumstance, but projects like that might pop up at the end of the year that we could have a more open forum to talk about readiness and also new projects that folks could weigh in on, specifically from the perspective of their status and
Yeah.
ability to advertise. So, but yeah, that's how we do it now. And it's a little bit of both. It's kind of current year but focused on the next year's tip develop. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just conclude by saying, I think if there was a committee and it was focused on the details of the projects, the readiness of the projects, things like that, and not a committee that's tasked with developing a tip recommendation, I think there would be a lot more. Then I think people would feel like, okay, I don't have to be a part of that committee because my voice is still gonna be able to weigh in on the development of the tip and the actual projects that are programmed. And I could see there being a lot of value in having a committee that's learning more about projects and being able to bring that information to the committee and not feeling like that committee is the group that has to kind of develop the actual tip recommendation, which I think is what, as Dennis said, and I agree, and Brian too, which I think a lot of people want to be a part of.
Very good point, Eric. Thank you. And thank you, Derek. Go ahead, Leonard.
Thanks. I'll be very brief. Whether we have this tip committee or not, I very much like the idea of people being able to see the scoring of the projects. I think that'd be a great way for everyone to understand better what goes into the projects, because scoring the projects and the process. I think it gets us a lot more involvement from professionals, residents, staff. Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm going to call on myself. So yeah, I mean, Eric, similar to what you just said, I was thinking along the same lines that there needs to be, whether it's a technical committee or a tip committee or some group of folks who, if we had a Bedford case again, and I'm going to be really careful here, who could come and say, technically speaking, this doesn't meet for these technical reasons. Some group of folks, then right now it's usually when John Bouchard speaks before the full board that we all sort of go, oh, okay. If that could be done in a little more detail before either a technical committee or like sort of like a group of gatekeepers like you're talking about, Eric, who kind of maybe don't make a recommendation, but do have the ability to say to the full body, yes, no, because of these technical reasons, not because of these political reasons or these policy reasons. I think there's a lot of value there. And certainly that's something that I would support. I also agree personally that, sort of an open scoring day or through some committee is a good idea. Tip readiness days, I was sort of thinking maybe dividing that up and doing different regions at the same time or something. Because 8 hours a day, 8 hours of projects is just unfair to the people that go last. So if we could divide up everything, or different types of projects. Thank you, Jen. Yeah, bike projects over here and road projects over there, et cetera, something like that. And I do like the idea of giving cities and towns additional opportunities to kind of weigh in, whether it's before a small group of people. I've never liked how public comment on days where voting takes 2 hours when everyone just sort of says what they say about how great their project is. I don't think that that's necessarily the best way to do it. I understand why we do it, but I think if there was a better way, we could probably figure it out. And again, just to reiterate what you said, Eric, I like the, not a recommendation, but just sort of a technical gatekeeping role sort of a thing. So let me throw this back to Tegan, because we do have an MPO meeting coming up. Tegan, is that a good kind of launching pad for you to think more about this for us?
Yeah, so what I'm thinking we'll do is, so if you all do, before the next meeting, read what's already in this document, there is some of that baseline, you know, this is what committee members do. There's an election of the chair of those committees, et cetera. These are the basic mandates of the committees that exist now. So some of that information about committees now is there. And what we as staff will do is talk a little more internally, and perhaps with some of you, like maybe with you, Derek, or otherwise, about what the structure for either, well, maybe both, but an ongoing sort of more process-focused committee and or kind of individual meetings that might get at some of these deeper details, and think of sort of a structure to lay out for that that might make sense, and work with staff needs, and try to come back to you next meeting with that, plus your comments on some of the other kind of information that's already in this document, if that makes sense for next steps. Oh, you're muted. Sorry. So if that works, we will
No,
do that.
Too many open windows. Yeah, no, that sounds like a great opportunity. So let us kick this around. Why don't you send kind of the current version out again to folks? And if I could ask you and your folks to think about this, sort of what you've just heard, and you know, keep moving it forward. I think that's the most important thing for us. In our last minute, let's talk about next meeting, unless you have something else, Tegan.
Sorry, I was just going to confirm that the other thing that I did here that we'll propose here is thinking about pulling some of the presentations out of the main policy board meeting and maybe into, for example, like the UPWP committee meeting. We can talk about that a little bit and what that might look like, and come back with a proposal to you about what that might look like. And then, yes, then we can talk about the next meeting, unless anyone disagrees with what I just said.
I think you're hearing consensus by silence. So,
Great.
okay. Where are we meeting again? 2 weeks?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll see everybody back here in 2 weeks on the 17th at 9 a.m. And we'll continue this discussion. Thanks for everyone's time today, and we'll see you all in 5 minutes. Thanks,
Yes.
everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you.
And that's inevitable, not inevitable, although I'm sure it was
Oh.
inevitable that he would be inevitable.
Corrected. Thank you, Lee.
So bye-bye.
Unmutable. No, wait a second. Anyway. Bye.